So let's get started here. What is a designer's job? So this is often something people would think about when they think about design, right? They think about drawing shapes, picking typefaces and picking colors and creating layouts and user flows and creating components for a design system. And even though all of these tasks are definitely a very big part of our job, they're only the visible final output. So I like this quote a lot. It's from Abstract. The majority of a design job is orchestrating the team, ensuring visual consistency, updating stakeholders, documenting decisions, interpreting feedback, and delivering the work for implementation. So design has a lot that happens behind the scenes. And actually a lot of minds that need to collaborate to build a successful product. So it is clear that we need to work on establishing processes and have tools that help us collaborate as good as possible and to communicate effectively with our team, as well as it's important to generate detailed documentation explaining our design decisions so knowledge can be a strength in our organization even after we leave. And that is actually what this talk is about. So version control. What is version control? So a version control system, also known as a VCS, is a system that allows us to track changes in files over time. And this is also across different users and across different computers. It allows many people to successfully collaborate in complex projects. And many of you will probably know Git, either have heard of it or are familiar working with it. It's the most popular version control system of all time. Something interesting and unfortunate is that version control systems in design are always behind those of code. So this is due to the complexity of the type of information that is being tracked. Even now in 2020, feature parity has not been reached. We have a set of useful features that make version control important. So let's go over them one by one. The first one is being able to back up and restore. So you can jump back to any moment in time. Then we have synchronization. We can share our files and stay up to date with the latest version. We also have short-term undo. So we can play around with an idea and then, whoops, it's not the right thing. Okay, we can go back to the last good version, no problem. We also have long-term undo. So if we want to know what change was introduced a year ago, maybe it had a bug in it, we can go back a year and check. We can also track changes. So as files are being updated, we can leave a message explaining why a change was made. We can also track ownership. So every time that we make changes, that is tagged with the name of the person who made it. And this is very good for blaming, but even more importantly, it's good for giving credit. We're also able to sandbox. So this means we can make temporary changes in an isolated area without worrying that it's going to affect the files that everybody else is working with. And we can use this isolated area to work out the kinks before merging it back into the files that the rest of our team is using. And finally, we have branching and merging. And these are the two most important features of version control. They're like the golden children, because they allow us to have a process in which we can make our changes in isolation in our branch. Then we can share them with another person, have them review it, have a conversation about it, make a decision together whether we want to proceed with those changes. And if we do, then we can add them back to the common project or merge them back. So let's just take a look at this kind of a little bit more in detail. A very simple scenario. I'm also going to go over some vocabulary in case you're not familiar with it. So first we have a repository or a repo. And this is basically a container for all of the project's files that is going to be tracked by version control. Then we have the master or the mainline. And this is also sometimes called the main trunk. And it is an agreed upon source of truth version of the files. And it's typically what is used as the base for new work. Then we have a branch, which is our own personal workspace. And it's basically a copy of the repository, which we can modify in an isolated area and track changes separately. We can then try out ideas knowing that these changes will not affect anyone else. So our working copy is our local copy of these files. And this is where we make the changes. And we can see here, we've now changed the square from purple to red. Once we make a change, we have two options. We can either say, no, we don't want the change, never mind. Then we revert, which means that we throw away the local changes and we go back to the previous version. Or if we do want the changes, we can say, okay, let's go ahead and commit it. So that to commit changes is to basically save the latest changes, which is a snapshot of your repository. And when we commit, we are able to add a commit message, which is a short message that describes our changes. This is what was changed and why it was changed. And we typically have a space to give a title and then a description of our changes. And over time, we will have what we call a change log or change history, which is just a list of commit messages since the file was created. So our changes, when we are happy with our changes, we can now ask for one of our coworkers to review them. So basically a review is sharing your changes with somebody else to be able to have a conversation about it before integrating it back to master. And when we make changes, all we store is the diffs or the differences between the files that are in master and our files in our branch. So this is for two reasons. When we store diffs, we typically have smaller file sizes. So it's a faster process to upload and download changes. But it also really helps with the review process because the reviewer can focus only on what was changed and not on the full copies of every single file. Once our reviewer has approved our changes, then we can go ahead and merge. And merging is basically applying these diffs back to master. So they integrate our work with the work that is already in master. So if multiple people are working on the same file at the same time and they try to merge at the same time, what we can have is merge conflicts. So a merge conflict is basically when our edits overlap or contradict somebody else's edits, and the version control system is like, help, I can't resolve this on my own. I need you to help me solve this. When we have merge conflicts in a code version control system, typically the version control system offers a way to merge the different files. And it's not always painless, but it's mostly relatively painless. When we have merge conflicts in design, the version control system does not really offer a way. Actually, I'm sorry, this is wrong. I meant to write, the version control system does not offer ways to merge the different files. So it's actually an all or nothing process. Either we take their changes or we overwrite their changes with ours. And we have some techniques for dealing with this that I will share with you a bit later on. Okay, so that is version control in general as a concept. Now let's talk about version control specifically for design. So today we're going to be talking about abstract for Sketch and version history for Figma. And we're talking about them because they are the biggest players in UI design today. So the first and most important thing is to be very clear that version history is not version control. So version history does not offer a way to branch, to manage conflicts, or to merge changes to a file. Abstract is an external software for version control, and it supports Sketch and now recently Adobe XD. It's in beta mode. Version history is an integrated feature, which is a part of Figma. There are other tools that are competitors to Abstract, and they can be used for version control. But as far as I know, none of these offer support for Figma. So some of these tools are Cactus, Plant, Pix, Folio, Tower. I'll provide a link to my slides later, so you can go ahead and click on any of the links that I have here. Okay, so let's start with Abstract. Abstract is called, quote unquote, the GitHub of design. So it's a design workflow management system, and its focus is on providing historical context without information loss. It was originally targeted to Sketch users, and now it's expanding to Adobe XD. It is Mac only, and it launched in 2017 with an estimated valuation of $190 million. So Abstract is based on Git. It has the similar basic functionalities that a version control system has for code. And it also has a very opinionated workflow. So there's like kind of like one way you work with it. Let's take a look at what that is. So first we have all of our list of our repositories. In the case of Abstract, they're called projects. And here we can either create a new project if we don't have any yet, or we can select a project. In this case, I'll be selecting the SimpLabs website project. And this is what it looks like when the project opens on Abstract. So after this, the next thing I need to do to start working is to create a new branch. I do it in this button on the upper right-hand corner. And I can give my branch a name. It has a character limit of 56 characters. And then I can open my file, and I have to open it directly from Abstract. So this is to ensure that the changes I made are being tracked by Abstract. Now I've opened my file, and I can see that Abstract's plugin is appearing now at the bottom of my window. If the plugin is in the way, you can tap on the logo and it'll move to the top. So in this case, my task is to remove this blue hero section. It's a placeholder asset on the background. So I'm going to replace it with an asset from our team video. And I'm also going to simplify the headline and the subheadline. Okie dokie. Now my changes are done. And now I can save the file and commit the changes. So once I save the file, that commit changes button is going to become enabled. I can tap on it and I can go ahead and leave a message. So I have the room to give a title and a description. And as a tip, when you're working with Abstract, what you can do is always like start writing your commit message and then click cancel. So you can write your commit message in bits and pieces as you go, and it'll always save whatever it is that you wrote. So instead of waiting for a feature to be done or like, you know, half the day or a full day to pass, then it's hard to remember what it is exactly that you did on your design file. Just do it every, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. Whenever you have finished doing a part of your work, you can start writing this message, click cancel. And then once you have an actual chunk of work that you want to commit, you'll have all those messages saved up. Okay, so now I've committed my changes and I can go back to Abstract and I can see here on the panel, those changes start appearing. So over time, they will add up. It becomes a list, a change history. And I can then, when I'm all set, when I want some feedback, for example, or when I want somebody to review it, I can change the status of my branch. And there's a couple different ways to do it. I can use this little feature here, the branch status change feature, to communicate where I am with my work. But I can also rename the branch. So the branch can be renamed at any point. And so I can add a prefix to it if I want to communicate even more information about my work. And I can now go ahead and request a review. So for that, I click that green button at the upper right-hand corner, and I can add my reviewer's name. So the reviewer can be, for example, the person that requested the change, and it can also be someone that is part of my team that will do quality assurance check to my work. Okay, now I have added my boss here to review. And even though a review is not necessary for you to be able to merge your work, it is highly recommended because it ensures that our work quality remains high. It ensures that we are meeting the goals of the design change. And it also brings awareness to our team of what exactly it is that we are doing. Okay, now I'm waiting for my design to be approved, hopefully not too long. And once it's approved, I'll get a notification. This is a notification panel. I can access it on the upper right-hand corner of the screen. And I will also notice that the status of my branch has automatically changed. Now it says approved. And now I can go ahead and merge the branch. So I can also add a message here if I wish. And now I will be able to see on master all the different merges that have happened historically. And I can click on each one of them and see all the different commits that went into each one of them, and then be able to see the diffs as well. So when do we merge to master? There's actually two different approaches, and it depends on you and your team what it is that your approach is. So the first approach is that master means approved design. So once a design is approved by our team, we can go ahead and merge to master. And this means that master will always be ahead of the live product. So for handover, we don't share master with our developers. We instead can create a collection. A collection is a project, as a folder that presents our design. And the collection, we can create two different kinds of collections. So if it's a part of a branch, it lives within the branch. And once the branch is closed, the collection no longer updates. It freezes with that state of the branch. And the other option is to create a collection as part of master. So in this case, it will only update those artboards as we introduce more changes to master. So once a branch has been approved, then it'll update those collections. And we do have a feature called auto update that we can turn on and off to sort of freeze our designs at a certain point in time, in case that's useful. However, something that is kind of lacking is that once we create a collection, for example, as part of a branch, it sticks with that branch. So if we've created a pretty complex collection as part of a branch, the branch is then merged. And in the future, we're making more changes to that user flow, for example. We have to create a new collection from scratch. And even though it's not extremely time consuming, it can be tedious. It's a bit of a repetitive task. I think what we all hope for would be that we are able to kind of select which branch we want to see the changes reflected in that collection, but we're not there yet. The other approach for master is that master is a direct reflection of what is in production. So that means that we only merge changes back once they have been implemented. And they are, as a result, master is a direct reflection of what the user sees. The downside I see with this method is that as designs change more and more over time, it becomes harder and harder to merge them. And there will be more and more merge conflicts potentially arising. So I do recommend the first option. Even though it's not perfect, I think it has more benefits than downsides. Okay, so what happens when we have a merge conflict? In this case, we see something like this. So on the left-hand side, we have the master or the parent branch. And then on the right-hand side, we have our branch. And in this case, I made it relatively obvious what the merge conflict is. So we have that headline 4 that on the left side is red and on the right side is blue. And we also have this feature that I highlighted with the yellow dot that allows us to either see both artboards side by side, or we can also see them one on top of the other and just see the differences between the two. So it does help us sort of figure out what it is that the merge conflict is, but sometimes conflicts are kind of invisible. So they're really hard to figure out at first glance. It could be that a bunch of elements were turned into a group, so that now there's a new folder. It could be that we have changed the pins for resizing, or it could be just like micro updates to the styles and variables. And it can be very difficult to figure out what exactly is the difference. So to make things even worse, in abstract, a change is also just touching an artboard. So if I touch an artboard, if I copy and paste something from another artboard to my artboard where I'm working, that is already considered a change in abstract. So yeah, let's take a look at how we resolve merge conflicts. So first of all, there's two options in terms of which artboard we can keep. So we can either keep master or the parent, in which case we overwrite our work in our current branch with the master or the parent, or we can select our branch, in which case we overwrite master. And as I said, it's unfortunately an all or nothing approach. So you have to select an entire artboard. You can't cherry pick items from here and there. When we have merging conflicting artboards, what we can do, or what is the recommended workflow, which is very tedious and unfortunate, but basically grab pen and paper or digital pen and paper, take note of which of the artboards are conflicting, then cancel out of the update branch flow, then go back to your branch, duplicate the artboards that have conflicts, go back to update from master or from parent, and select master to overwrite your work in all those conflicting artboards and confirm. So now our file will have both artboards from master and our own side by side, and now we can manually merge. So if you've ever worked with code, this probably is making your eyes bleed. It is unfortunately the way that we have to work with these programs, and hopefully it will be improved in the future, but this is the current status. So what is best is to avoid merge conflicts. And here are 3 collaboration techniques that we can use to avoid them. The first is if you're working with a non-designer, for example, a copywriter. And in this scenario, the person is going to do updates in like a lot of your artboards. So this is how you can do it. First of all, stop working on your branch, just leave it. Have the non-designer make a child branch and then do their work in the child branch. Then have them add you as a reviewer. You can go ahead and check all the work and then merge their child branch back to your parent branch, and then you can continue working. The second scenario is if multiple designers are working on the same task or on the same feature. So in this case, first do some organization within your team and divide the work. And then create a parent branch, which is going to be the feature branch. Then each designer working on that is going to create their own child branch. And ideally, each designer is going to work on their own artboards. That is how you avoid those merge conflicts. And then we can merge all of those children branches back to the parent branch, and then merge that parent branch back to master. The third scenario, which is the most complex scenario, is if multiple designers are working on the same artboard. So for example, I'm working on parent and then somebody else is working on a child branch, but we're working on the same artboard and we know it. So in this scenario, the person in the child branch can duplicate the artboard that they know will be worked on by multiple designers, and then they work on the duplicate. When the updates are made in the parent branch, click update from parent. And now you will have, again, the scenario of having both artboards side to side. And you can then bring your changes to the other artboard manually, remove the duplicate artboards, and merge back to parent. So something super important with all of this is to be considerate. When merging your work into somebody else's branch, always have a conversation before overriding your colleague's work. Okay, so that was abstract, and now let's talk a little bit about Figma. So Figma is known as the Google Docs for design. Its focus is on collaboration and on working on the same document real time. It is a web-based tool. It runs in all operating systems. It launched in 2016, and it is valued at more than $2 billion. So Figma has this feature called version history. And version history is basically a timeline of events that dates back to the file's creation. So as I said before, version history is not version control. So there's no way to branch, there's no way to manage conflicts, and there's no way to merge changes to a file. Instead, what version history is basically a list of autosaves. Autosaves every 30 minutes of inactivity in the file. And the autosave includes the name of the person who made changes, but it doesn't force a message describing the what and the why of those changes. And it also doesn't provide any tools that highlight the differences between them. So what we can do is manual versioning is what it's called. So basically manually saving to version history. A version can be deliberately saved and named. Autosave versions can also be renamed, so we can go back in history and organize our history. And when we go back in time, we can see, restore, and make duplicates of a version. And what is super nice is that we can also share specific versions. So each version has a URL that is very helpful for freezing design at a certain point for handover. So let's take a look at where it is. First, we open our Figma file, and we open that menu that is next to the file name to reveal this menu. And then we can select Show Version History. Now we have a new panel on the right-hand side, which is the Version History panel. And here we can see a combination of, well, actually in this specific example, we can only see 2 manually saved versions. So when I want to manually save a version, I click on that plus button, and now I can add a title and a description, and I can go ahead and save. Over time, this is kind of what it's going to look like. So it will be a combination of version history with the autosaves and then manual versioning. And we can see all of the different team members working together on the file. So when we compare both of these approaches in this list of features that I mentioned at the beginning, we can see that Figma and Abstract share quite a few features. So they share being able to back up and restore files. They share synchronization, short and long-term undo. Tracking changes, kind of. So Abstract forces you to track changes. They force you to add a commit message as part of your workflow. Figma doesn't force you, but you can do it manually. And they do both help tracking ownership. The really big difference between the two is with sandboxing, branching, and merging. So sandboxing is something that comes naturally as a result of branching. But with version history and Figma, we don't have branching. However, we can sort of sandbox, so we can duplicate different files or frames, play with them, and then once they have been approved, we can then integrate those changes manually. But what it unfortunately does lack is branching and merging. However, for me, it's super important to emphasize this is not about which program is better. It's not the good old like Sketch versus Figma debate. Although it's unlikely that they will both work together ever. It's been stated multiple times in their Twitter accounts. Both platforms will continue evolving and introduce more and more features. So they will both be improving over time. But yeah, as I said, it's not about which is best. So both Sketch and Figma have their strengths and weaknesses. They're both great tools. One is better for some things, the other one is better for other things. Neither of them is perfect. However, even if we have a personal favorite, we don't always get to choose which software we work with. So very often we join a team and there's a specific software that is being used, and that is the one that we have to work with. So what is more important than debating which software is better is it is to invest in practices that bring success to our team in the long run, no matter what piece of software we use. So it's important to know how to get the best out of each, and to invest in these good collaboration practices, because good collaboration practices mean happy teams. Happy teams build better products, and better products hopefully have happier users. So let's take a look at some best practices that can be used no matter which software you use. So first of all, it's all about communication and establishing conventions. Experiment with different approaches and integrate new ideas little by little until you find what it is that works best for both you and your team. Next, think systemically. So it's always the same story, no matter the company, no matter the team. Designers always struggle with solving the same problem over and over, and with having their designs not being properly implemented. Developers always struggle with custom styling of every single component, and with that contributing to a messy code base that is really difficult to work with. And no matter which team you're a part of, you're probably going to be struggling with deadlines and with the demands of a growing product. So always, it's good to think systemically and to establish practices that help avoid frustration in the team. Some of these practices include component-based reusable design, using variables for everything. So variables for fonts, for colors, for spacing, and to establish a design system. So this includes not just a UI library, but also guidelines, documentation, and knowledge sharing in your team. It's also super important to learn how to articulate the what and the why. So even though a picture is worth 1,000 words, it can be very hard to tell what the difference is between two versions of a file. And even more importantly, it's impossible to know why that change exists unless you write it down. So express yourself, express what it is that other people need to look for, and express why it was done. And know that this is not just for others, this is also helping your future self when you go back to the file and you have forgotten about the details. Okay, so one of the first best practices is to communicate your status. So status matters. Let your team know your status. So let them know if some work is in progress, if it's exploratory. Let them know if you are ready for a review or if you're open for feedback. And also let them know if it's final. Let them know that if they can build up on it, if they can develop it, if they can use it as a base for a new design. So in Abstract, we can communicate our status by using the branch status feature that I showed earlier, and also by renaming the branch. In Figma, we can communicate this by renaming the frame or by using a status plugin, such as this one that I'm linking here. And when we rename the frame in Figma, what we can do is simply put one of these emoji dots on it. Okay, so now let's talk about commit messages. Because even if your tool forces you to create commit messages, it unfortunately won't save you from your own laziness. So this is something that I saw in my team Slack recently. It was an example, a screenshot of something seen in the wild. But basically, that is what a change log looked like. So design many features, design features, fixes work in progress, design features, fixes. Okay, like that's not useful for anyone. We need to learn how to articulate our thoughts and actually be reflected when we write our commit or version history messages. So definitely use the title for your summary. There's different character limits for the different programs. And then we can give a more detailed explanation in the description. It's best practice to use imperatives. So add icons is better than added icons or adds icons. And it's good to use also proper grammar, capitalization, and punctuation. If you have an issue tracker, definitely add the ticket number to your title. And also make sure to include all kinds of contextual documentation that is relevant for the task. So if you have a link that is, for example, relevant to the design system, or is user testing results, or A/B testing outcomes, or previous design explorations, add all of those there. And make sure you are committing or adding to version history several times a day. So every time that you finish a part of a feature or that you arrive to a decision, just commit your changes. It's always better to overcommit than to undercommit. Now, about commit messages, or these can also be used for branch names or version history titles, of course. What we can use is this engineering practice that we can borrow called semantic Git. And it's basically using a keyword prefix that helps us communicate the type of work we're doing. So here are a few examples. Feat can be used for the design of a new feature, update when we update a feature, explore when we're playing around with a design idea, copy is for changes in text, fix for a bug fix, docs, changes to the documentation, and then we can use the word style or polish for formatting, spacing, sizing, colors, stuff like that, but no major structural changes. And then chore and clean up for exactly that, if we're cleaning up or organizing our file, but there's also no major design changes. And then as extra credit, you can also use an emoji. I really like doing it because it makes the file look prettier, and it also adds a little visual cue to each of the keywords. Something also vital, the most vital thing is to have somebody review your changes. So make sure you are having a conversation about your work. This also helps you share the responsibility of that work with your team, and make sure that all edge cases have been considered. So in Abstract, we have this pull request workflow in which our reviewer checks our work before it is merged. But in Figma, we can also have this type of workflow. So we can update the frame status from from in progress to ready for review. Then we can tag a reviewer in a comment. And once they have approved the work, we can go ahead and update the frame status again. So put in like a final emoji, for example. And these reviews are a chance for us to be giving and receiving feedback. And here are my golden rules for design feedback. So first of all, your feedback should always be connected to your design goals. Keep it focused to those design goals. It's not about your personal taste. It's about whether that work is meeting its objective. Always also keep it constructive instead of critical. So think before you speak. How is saying what you're going to say going to help improve the work? Also, make sure to point out the strengths. What is the work doing really well? This makes sure that they don't get removed in the next iteration. And finally, if something looks totally wrong or just odd, instead of assuming that it is wrong, ask, why is this here? Because it could be that something is a specific way because of a reason or some information that you just don't know about. So it's always better to ask instead of to assume. Okay, so now I'd like to go briefly over what is next in version control. Or yeah, let's take a look. Basically, these are some companies that are doing some interesting stuff, and we might be able to see some of the stuff they're doing in design tools in the future. So the first one is called Almanac, and it's a real-time document editing cloud-based platform with version control. So this is basically Figma and Abstract together. And this is what gives me a lot of hope for Figma developing a more robust version control system in the future, because it's already being done for document editing, for text editing. I found this document because Abstract invested in it. It is open source, and I think it's something worth taking a look at. It's quite interesting. Next, we have these three interesting companies in terms of product design. So these all claim to be the future of product design. The first two, Modules and Alva, are in this kind of like visual coding category. They're like visual prototyping with code components. Then we have Supernova, which syncs design and code of all components across all tools and platforms. Pretty impressive if they're able to achieve that. So what is true is that all of these companies, all of these tools are trying to bridge the gap between design and development tools. And as we bridge that gap, what we can hope for is that version control also becomes more sophisticated and all the systems keep up to be able to be used in our tools, no matter what tool we are using. Okay, so now a brief conclusion. First of all, if you are still here and paying attention, thank you. I really appreciate it. So first point, you don't need to know how to code to benefit from version control. So even though these practices come originally from engineering, they are beneficial to anyone that is handling complex amounts of digital information. Second, getting familiar with these concepts help us speak the same language. So bridging the gap between design and development helps us collaborate and work better together. And more importantly, when we collaborate and work better together, our users will benefit from a better built digital product. And last, it takes a village. So version control helps us bring in transparency and create accountability in design. It helps us make changes visible that might otherwise go unnoticed, like a big cleanup. And it also helps us credit all the team members that collaborate to turn ideas into reality. So that is all for me tonight. Thank you for listening. I will post the link to my slide in the chat, and this is my contact information. Feel free to reach out, and we can chat more about this in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mar. Amazing, super insightful presentation. It's almost you can use your slides as a manual and just apply the workflows that you suggested. I think it's really cool. And let me, if you stop sharing your screen, then I can start sharing mine, and then we can jump into the Q&A.
Cool.
Right. All right, you should be able to see my screen. Yep, and there is a possibility to, of course, to upvote the question. So let's see how we are doing in time. We have half an hour to go with the question. So if anybody please go to use the QR code and upvote the questions that you find most interesting or ask your own. So the first question, what are your recommendations for a better versioning experience in the design system?
Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, the versioning experience in design systems is relatively clunky and requires a lot of manual work. So my recommendation would likely be to be very not careful per se, but like sensitive as far as what needs to be changed, to not just overwhelm the system with changes often. And then to communicate as well as possible, knowing that it is going to require your team to take a while to apply all those changes. But it all comes down to communication. I think that is the most important thing. So establishing a practice in which everybody is super aware that a new version of a component has been released. Some companies, for example, have like a Slack channel that is dedicated to that. Some companies have kind of like a newsletter that like a MailChimp newsletter that a team can sign up to if they're interested in these changes. And then every X or Y amount of time, you can send a newsletter with communicating the changes. And then, I mean, as I'm sure the person asking the question knows, the importance of having a single source of truth. So make sure that you are actually linking to a single document that explains the changes, just so that everybody can be on the same page as much as possible and not be more confused than rather finding the changes useful.
Thank you so much. Right, let's mark it as answered. And then Abstract isn't famous for being slow. Have you faced this before? If yes, have you faced this before? And if yes, how did you tackle this?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, it's basically all about making files as small as possible. So what you can do is make a file for every different part of your app or different part of your digital product, or some people even do like a new file per feature. Definitely keeping assets in the files as small as possible, so you can reduce the size of your images. And then you can provide a separate link with the full res image, full retina, full res. But yeah, it's literally just have to keep files small. So keep track of the size of your files. And once they start becoming bigger, chop them up.
Cool. Thank you. In which setting you wouldn't recommend working with Abstract?
I mean, if you're using Sketch, I would always recommend working with Abstract, even if you are a lone designer, because this way you can keep track of your changes over time. So I think once you start working with version control, it's kind of hard to go back to working without, because there are so many advantages to doing so. So I don't think that there's any setting in which I wouldn't recommend working with Abstract if you are using Sketch.
Okay. Gotcha. Does Figma need version control? If it is like Google Docs, people are working in real time together, so there cannot be conflicts.
Well, there's no merge conflicts, but there can be conflicts in the sense of you are changing something that somebody else is expecting to be in a different way. And it requires a lot more communication between the team if you're working with Figma to make sure that you are not accidentally overwriting somebody else's work or creating a change that is unwanted or unexpected. So in my opinion, it would be only beneficial to have a bit of a more robust system, especially so that you can have a bit more of a workflow in which you have a conversation about something before you put it in the files where everybody else everybody else is using. But I think it does kind of spark the whole like, which is better, you know, Abstract or Figma. And like, it's really not about that. It's just about collaborating as best as possible. And there are a lot of teams that use or like they manually recreate some of the features that version control provides. So they might have like a change log in Notion, and then they will write down there like what was changed, when, why, and provide URLs to specific versions of the file in Figma. I don't know. The bigger the file gets, the more complex the product gets. I do see the value of it, but I know that it's not everyone's cup of tea.
Yeah. Thank you. What are your thoughts on aligning design system library versions with code repository versions?
My thoughts on aligning design system library versions with, I'm not sure what this person means, like making sure that the versions are the same in terms of the work should be at the same level. So the design system library should represent parity of, okay. I don't know if it's 100% possible. Like, I do think that design is always going to be ahead of the live product. But the goal is that it's as close as possible. So I would be a fan for striving for that, but I wouldn't be a fan of being super like not idealistic, or I mean, of being super idealistic and expecting it to always be on par.
Yeah,
I hope
because
that answers your question.
Naturally change, right? Like a lag of time, just like because design comes earlier in the software development workflow.
Correct.
All right, then, and we have a next question. What are your thoughts on challenges faced when scaling up design practices in larger organizations? Gaurav, you are in the call, so if there's anything that you would like to follow up with, just unmute yourself and engage in the conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't type in the entire thing, but when you look at larger organizations where you have multiple development centers, multiple development sites, a lot of different customers, you start getting into a lot of bespoke implementations. You start looking at a lot of different design sites. What has been your experience, or what would you advise, or what's been your, the best practices that you've adopted when you look at scaling up design practices across these?
So as a question for you does that mean like multiple design teams as well? Or is it a single design team with multiple products?
No, multiple design teams as well. So you could have one in Asia, another one in Europe, another one in the United States. So you have challenges of demographics, you've got challenges of time zone, you've got challenges of different backgrounds, as well as education, as well as different cultures. So all of that, to try to mesh all of that into one single cohesive design practice or design framework itself has a lot of logistical challenges. And when you add another layer of on top of that, where you have different localized customers as well, then you're starting to look at a logistical problem when you start looking at these design practices. So what's been your experience, or what's your advice in such cases?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot to unpack there for sure. And it sounds like it's quite the challenge. I haven't worked with a team that big, but there are a couple things that have been invaluable for me. So one of them is having design QA, in which another designer actually goes in and checks up to the pixel whether things are up to the agreed guidelines or not. So if you have guidelines for style variables, accessibility guidelines, etc., somebody else goes in and like really checks, makes sure that everything is following the guidelines and all edge cases have been considered also from their perspective. And that has really been helpful in terms of increasing the quality of design, and also in terms of being more transparent within the team, what it is that one person is doing. And another thing is more like a bit of like a soft skill. And I was actually talking about it with Samuel during the breakout room earlier. I recently saw a talk with the UX designer. He probably has a bigger title than that, but I don't remember exactly, from Xing. And they do design feedback meetings, which are once a week. And it is taking people from all the different teams, all the different design teams in the organization. In their case, they only do it with UX designers. So, keeping kind of to the same department or the same type of role. But it's a fixed team that meets every single week to provide design feedback to a single person. And in this way, there is more kind of like knowledge transfer and opportunities to give design feedback across the different teams, across the different time zones. So I haven't had the pleasure of working that way yet, but I think it's a fantastic idea, and I'm happy to find his talk and send you the link to it, because I think you might find it useful.
Thank you. That would help. Thank you so much, Mar.
Sure.
Thank you. When did you start using version control system in your design work?
I don't know, like I used to be a developer before, so I was kind of designing also with code. So that was 8 years ago-ish. And then I transitioned to full-time design like 3.5 years ago. And I have been using version control since the beginning, since day one then. So, I mean, there have been projects in which, like back when I was designing, I was maybe messing around with, back when I was developing, I was messing around with design, and I wasn't necessarily always using a version control system then. But I always came up to the problem of like file 1, file 2, final, which is the right file. So kind of as early as possible, I started using version control systems.
And what is your personal favorite design software and why?
I use Sketch because it's what I've always used, and I know how to use it really well, and it's easy. I have used Figma for a couple small projects, but I haven't used it kind of like in a bigger scale design system, everything. But I am very curious about using it. Yeah, just out of habit and out of the fact that at my company we use Sketch, I use Sketch.
Nice. All right. And how do you embed a design Git flow into Agile Scrum workflow?
I'm not sure I understand this question. So
if we have Samuel in the call, maybe Samuel, you could, yeah, thank you. Maybe you can.
Hey.
Again.
Yeah, so I mean, in development, there's usually a very clear connection between where you are in your Scrum sprint and how your Git looks like, in a sense, right? You know, at the start, all your environments are in sync, and then you basically, developers start branching from develop and create a mess and develop, and then at some point you want to have it cleaned again, everything in the end of the sprint. And how does it work in design, and where do those Git flows kind of connect in the setup? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, it does make sense. I mean, they are kind of like going in parallel, so they don't actually connect. It's not like you're using the same system for both, for both design and development. I don't know. I've never worked in that specific way, as you mentioned. So I've never had my design or my development have to match exactly the workflow of like Agile or Scrum. But I'm assuming that it's going to work the same or very similar to how an engineering team works with it. So if there are tasks for multiple features, the designer branches for each of the features and works on those branches at the same time. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but it may be that I just don't have that specific experience.
So the idea is that your kind of design master branch is 100% clean once a sprint starts in development. Did I get that correctly?
Your design master branch doesn't necessarily need to be clean when development starts. What development needs is a frozen state of design. So you can provide a collection which houses your artboards, and then those are going to be like either be updated, or you can use auto update to freeze them if need be. And then whenever the design is approved, you merge it back, and then that collection will remain frozen within that branch. And that is what you can provide the developers. But it kind of also depends what it is that you consider master in your design files.
Yeah, that answered it. Thanks.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Samuel. Another question from Gaurav. What has your experience been with using version control system with upstream and downstream stakeholders? What are the principal challenges faced?
What do you mean by upstream and downstream stakeholders, Gaurav?
So typically, if you have your requirements coming in either directly from a customer or maybe a product lead or some kind of customer proxy somewhere, or you have maybe a product manager who you're interfacing with. So that's who I look as an upstream stakeholder, and I'm just using it as a generic, explanation. It could be very different in your case, but and from a downstream, of course, you have the development teams, you have the you may have the lone wolf developer who decides to do things themselves, so so that's and I think, in my opinion, the challenges really are not per se with the version control system. They're more human, because it's so difficult sometimes just to keep your upstream and downstream stakeholders in sync with what you're doing, that a majority, I think, of your time sometimes just goes in, getting all of them to sit and speak the same language and being consistent with what you're exactly saying. In my background, in my experience, that's been principally the challenge. Version control itself has not been a challenge. It's keeping your stakeholders, because they don't use the same tools as you. And they're different stakeholders, changing stakeholders. I think the problem, at least I've seen in my experience, has been more human rather than more technical, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I can agree with that. It's the soft skills. I mean, I do use my version control system with my stakeholders. Mm-hmm. So my developers directly take the design straight from Abstract. Mm-hmm. And provide feedback directly on Abstract. And my upstream stakeholders, so whoever's creating the requirement, is also going to be my reviewer on Abstract, and is mm-hmm. also going to be providing me feedback on Abstract. So I use personally a combination of Abstract and then Notion to mm-hmm. document the design system. And I just ensure that there's always links to everything. Also links to everything in the GitHub issues. That I always put my documentation in the same exact place, which is Notion for me. Mm-hmm. And basically that it's like very transparent what happens when mm-hmm. and where. But of course, miscommunications do happen.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I answered your question.
I think topic for an offline conversation, I guess.
Yeah. I think we can have another conversation about this.
Thank you, no problem.
Perfect. Then we definitely have the basis to connect and follow up on that. And a question from Andrea: how do you start using version control, system if a team of designers haven't worked with it before, and start building the practice? What is the basis for it? Very good question. I think I would also relate to that.
I think it's really different when you come from an engineering background than when you come from a purely design or maybe sometimes even print design background. To kind of wrap your head around this, what version control is and how is it going to be useful for me, and is it just slowing me down and slowing my work down? To reflect and think and create all of these commits. However, I think that the best place to get started is to first understand what it is that version control is. So that is something that you can do by reading and rereading and maybe watching a few short videos on YouTube, talking with me gladly, so I can give you some examples. And then to just introduce things little by little. I mean, unfortunately, adding a version control system is kind of like okay, bam, we're now using it. But the exact way that you and your team decide to craft messages or communicate with each other or create workflows is something that you can have kind of like a kickoff meeting about, and then tweak it over time and be maybe you have half an hour meeting every week where you talk about how are we feeling about the version control system, what it is that can make our workflow better, or where are we being hindered, and then slowly addressing those things with your team. So even though you can't add the version control system little by little, establishing these practices with your team is something that you can do little by little, and that hopefully over time you kind of find your groove. But if you're completely lost and if you're interested, just let me know and I'd be happy to sit down with you for a coffee and kind of like show you my own version control system.
I will love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. And that was our last question. So basically what I'm gonna do is stop sharing, and also I'll stop the